So that can also be looked upon as a threat to the most ignorant of quote unquote European Americans, because they don't have the education. And so as a result of, they wake up every morning and they start seeing more and more people of color, particularly after 8 years of the Obama administration and black people in the White House. That was a hard pill to swallow, even though the America said, hey, you know, this is the ideal. We want to move in this direction. But the demographics are not supporting, in a sense, that ideal. But this new generation coming up, which I think is the generation that's going to change literally the world, they're not having that. And that's why you see, if you will, these ignorant European Americans out marching, if you will, and protesting. You know, Jews will not replace us, and all of these crazy things. So when you start seeing white people marching, you know there's a shift coming. Go ahead, Jane.
Yeah. If people think, and I agree with everything you say, this is a ridiculous situation we have set ourselves up to lose. There's no way we can win if we continue to think that color is the main part of our personality, of our, or what gives us power. But if we could, in the schools today, teach that there is only one race, if we could refuse to go along with what Ben Wattenberg said. Have you read Ben Wattenberg's book, The Birth of Earth?
It took forever for me to find this darn thing, but it's on the way. But yeah, everybody, you got to get The Birth of Earth. It's a hard book to find because they really don't want you to have that book.
Because nobody wants you to read it. And they don't want you to read Nathan Rutstein's The Racial Conditioning of Our Children either. But everybody needs to read that one. It's absolutely essential that people who are in education read those two books, because then you'll realize after you read Wattenberg that the reason for the wall on the southern border of the United States is to keep those brown-skinned people out. We don't want this country to have all those brown-skinned people, as if brown-skinned people like the Aztecs didn't do fabulous things before white people got here and started to kill them because we thought they were savages because they don't worship properly. If you read Ben Wattenberg, you'll realize that they are doing everything they can. The government is, and particularly now under this fool, is doing everything it can to keep white women from having abortions. When he wrote the book in 1987, he said that one of the three things we can do to change this situation, to keep America a white man's land, is remember that 60% of the aborted fetuses every year are white. If we could keep that 60% alive, that would solve our birth dearth. Well, I quoted those statistics at a college not too long ago, and one of these young men with a red hat on, that said, the red cap on, that said, make America hate again, which is what it really means. He said, Mrs. Ellis, you've got your statistics wrong. I said, will you tell me your statistics? He said, now 39% of the fetuses that are aborted every year are white. 61% are fetuses of color. I said, you just made my point. He said, what do you mean? I said, that means that we are succeeding in seeing to it that white women have fewer abortions. He just was shocked. He said, I didn't think of it that way. I said, that's because you haven't been trained to think. You have only been trained to respond in ways that will get you a good grade in your classroom. Right. Start thinking. Right now, we own 39% of the aborted fetuses are white. If this person is president for 3 more years, which I don't think he will be, but if he is, within 3 more years, that statistic will be down to about 25%, because we are trying to do away with Planned Parenthood, as if that's all that Planned Parenthood clinics were for providing abortion. They do wonderful things and provide wonderful services for women who can't afford the services that would be offered in the regular doctor's office. They are absolutely essential. But you see, if we have this linear thinking person leading the country, and now this last week, I know you're going to think, well, stop talking about politics. We're talking about racism. Well, racism is politics in this country. Politics is racist in this country. You need to know that. Right now, they have decided that all the tips that people who work in restaurants get are going to go to the management instead of to the wait persons. This is ridiculous. They're working for $7 an hour, and depending on their tips, now those tips are going to go to the management. They're passing that law. I'm worried about that. I should think everyone would be worried about that kind of thing. Now, this week, we're planning on a huge military parade down the streets of Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C., which is mostly black. The inference with that kind of planning does not miss my attention. This is called power in action, people. We're talking about power, and we put our power in the hands of the wrong kind of people. Now, now you're thinking she doesn't like white people. Oh, yes, I do. I'm not prejudiced about white people. Some of my best friends are white. Make no mistake about that. However, they're different from the rest of them. We don't all have to act like fools, which is what we were sort of getting away from that. With Jimmy Carter helped, and even the Bushes helped a little bit. Georgie boy wasn't great, but his father knew a little bit about what he was talking about. And then we got this fool. Because white people are so angry at having a black man in the White House for 8 years. I remember when Richard Nixon said to a group of white reporters, "I'm trying to save the White House for you white people." At that point, I decided we've got to change the name of the White House to the President's Residence. Let's have it reflect what it is. Let's have a description that makes sense instead of calling it the White House. There are lots of White Houses in Washington, D.C. But that White House is, according to many people, for white people. That's called power in action, and we've been exposed to that long enough.
The air crackles with the tension born of uncomfortable truths when Dr. Jacqueline Badalora and Jane Elliot engage in conversation. It's a tension that reflects the very core of the subject they dissect, the enduring, often invisible structures of racial inequality that permeate our society. This isn't a theoretical exercise. It's a confrontation with the realities that shape the world we inhabit. A world where the past continues to cast a long, oppressive shadow. We live in a time where terms like white privilege and systemic racism are frequently invoked, yet often poorly understood. They become buzzwords, diluted by political rhetoric and dismissed by those unwilling to confront their implications. This conversation, however, cuts through the noise, offering a raw and unflinching examination of these complex issues. It's a reminder that these concepts are not mere academic abstractions. They are lived experiences, shaping destinies and dictating opportunities. Jane Elliot, a name synonymous with confronting prejudice, brings her signature directness to the forefront. Her challenge is not just to understand the mechanics of racism, but to dismantle the very symbols and institutions that perpetuate it. She dares to question the unquestionable, to scrutinize the foundations of our accepted norms, by asking us to reconsider the role of the church in slavery, or the loaded implications of calling the president's residence the White House. She forces us to confront the uncomfortable truths we often choose to ignore. Elliot's approach is visceral, designed to evoke discomfort and spark introspection. She understands that true change requires more than intellectual understanding. It demands an emotional reckoning. She doesn't offer platitudes or easy answers. Instead, she throws down a gauntlet, challenging us to look beyond the surface and confront the historical and ongoing injustices that fuel racial inequality. Complementing Elliot's passionate challenge, Dr. Jacqueline Badalora provides a crucial historical and legal framework. Her expertise allows us to understand how whiteness itself was not a natural, immutable category, but a social and political construct, deliberately crafted to maintain power and privilege. She illuminates the intricate web of laws, policies, and social norms that have systematically disadvantaged people of color for centuries. Badalora's analysis reveals the insidious nature of systemic racism. It's not simply about individual acts of prejudice, but about the embedded biases within our institutions, from the criminal justice system to education, housing, and employment. By understanding the historical roots of these systems, we can begin to see how they continue to perpetuate inequality today. This conversation is not for the faint of heart. It demands a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths, to challenge deeply held beliefs, and to acknowledge the ways in which we may be complicit in perpetuating inequality. It's a call to move beyond surface-level discussions and engage in a deeper, more meaningful dialogue about race. The power of this exchange lies in its ability to bridge the gap between abstract concepts and lived realities. By combining Elliot's confrontational approach with Badalora's scholarly insight, the video offers a comprehensive understanding of the multifaceted nature of racial inequality. It's a journey that forces us to examine our own biases and assumptions, and to consider the role we play in either perpetuating or dismantling these systems. In the next few minutes, prepare to be challenged, to be enlightened, and perhaps, to be changed. This is not just a conversation. It's a call to action. It's an invitation to engage with the uncomfortable truths that lie at the heart of our society, and to work towards a future where justice and equality are not just ideals but realities.
The locations are right. The shapes are distorted. You have to compare this map to any other map that you've ever seen before. You see the size of Africa on this map?
Yes. Huge, enormous.
Yes. Huge, enormous, because Africa is huge, enormous, and it isn't a country. Look at the size of Greenland on this map. Can you see it?
Tiny.
Yeah, and look at South America.
Yep.
According to this map is right. South America is 9 times larger than Greenland.
Okay.
Now you don't see that on any other map. Look at
No, not at all.
Alaska on this
All
map
right.
is smaller than Mexico, which is the truth. On most
Yep.
maps, Alaska is larger than Mexico. And on this map, the equator is at 0 degrees, which is right here, halfway between the North Pole and the South Pole.
Yep.
Those are important. Those are important facts that we should be teaching students in schools, and we aren't. We're using the Mercator projection map, which was made deliberately to show the superiority of the white countries in which there were Christians.
Yes.
Wow.
So so that we miseducate people on a daily basis, K through 16, K through forever, because if you go to a travel agency, you'll see the Mercator projection map, a great big wall-size map on the wall, which is not accurate. It's good for training navigators, but it is not worth a darn for training students.
Wow. Now, what map is this called? What is this called, Jake?
What?
What's the name of this map that we should get?
This is the Peters projection map. And at the bottom of the map, I'll give you this information because I think you ought to have it. You get it from Friendship Press, Post Office Box 37844, Cincinnati, Ohio, 45222, or simply Google it. Google the Peters projection map, and you'll get it from the ODT company, and they'll send you, if you, Philippe Matthews, in your position, send these people a letter or send them an email ordering that map, they'll send you dozens of things. Because and you, Dr. Badalora, they'll send you tons of things because they want to get this map out because it's a new view of the world. It's a more sane and a more factual and a more
truthful
view of the world.
Well, I'll send them the show. How about that? No, I've never seen this before.
And you haven't, Dr. Badalora?
I've heard of it, but I've never seen it.
I have not, Jane.
See, this is unfortunate because it's one of the ways we teach children how to see their world. And in the Mercator projection map, the United States is in the middle of the map. So that there's
my map doesn't show the U.S. in the center, and Africa's nice and big, but Greenland is huge on this thing.
You're right.
And Mexico small. So yeah, I would very much like to, I'm gonna, as soon as we get off the air, I'm gonna send in my request.
Yeah, they'll be delighted. Use my name and they'll be even more delighted because I tell this to every time I do a college, I show the difference between the Mercator map and the Peters projection map, and teachers, faculty members go, I didn't know this. And it's like, how dare you bring this to me? I say, well, hey.
That's why you're the teacher of teachers. That's why you're the teacher of teachers. All right, so we're getting started here. This is amazing. Yeah, I know that was all in the green room, family. How about that? This is what we do before we even go live, and we're live. But this is what we do and how we do it. Okay, historical day, historical moment. Didn't know if I could pull this off, but we did. Two of my favorite people, Dr. Jacqueline Badalora and Jane Elliot, is with us today to talk about the concept of white privilege, if it is, if it isn't. And let's do some quick introductions as if they really need to be introduced. But, you know, I'm a good host. So Dr. Jacqueline Badalora is the professor of sociology in what is it? I forgot where you work.
Xavier University.
St. Xavier University in Chicago. I say it a million times. St. Xavier University in Chicago. She's the author of Birth of a White Nation. And she's also a former Chicago police officer. We won't hold that against her too much. But she is absolutely a welcome scholar and guest on a reoccurring welcome scholar and guest on our show. Welcome back, Dr. Badalora.
Thanks for having me, Philippe.
And the lady who needs no introduction, but definitely will receive one, Jane Elliott, is the author of A Color in My Pocket, Blue Eyes, Brown Eyes Exercise, a book that I had to kind of threaten her and her family to do and finally release about 2-3 years ago. She's an internationally known teacher, lecturer, and diversity trainer, and a recipient of the National Mental Health Association Award for Excellence in education. She exposes prejudice and bigotry for what it is, an irrational class system based upon purely arbitrary factors. Welcome back, Jane Elliott.
Well, thank you, but I have to argue about something, naturally. I'm not a diversity trainer. I don't.
Then take it off of your bio, off your website.
I'm not a trainer. I'm an educator. And the word educator comes from the root dus, which means lead, the prefix e, which means out, the suffix ate, which means the act of, and the suffix or, which means one who does. I am not a trainer. A trainer, we train members of the military and dogs and horses to react to certain stimulus in certain prescribed ways. That's not what I do. I'm an educator. I lead people out of ignorance. Training is, I leave that up to people who are toilet training their children. After that, unless you're in the military, you don't need to be trained, you need to be educated. Am I being overly fussy about that? I think not.
No, you're being Jane Elliott about that, which is what we love. That's the reason why you're here. All right, so thank you for that, Jane, for that clarification between trainer and educator. So we just had a Super Bowl, and we saw the parade and the hoopla, and we saw masses and masses of mostly white men out there jumping on cars and breaking up things and turning over stuff and tearing up the community. And not once were they called a thug, or they weren't, the National Guard didn't come out to stop them. There was no riot police coming in to quell them. And so one has to ask about this concept of white privilege. Mm-hmm. So I am going to start with you, Dr. Badalora, on your thoughts on this, and then I'm going to have well, I should call you Dr. Jane Elliott.
No, you shouldn't. No, you shouldn't. No.
Well, I know you don't like that. I know you don't, but you know we love you. So anyway, Jane Elliott, I'll have you come on afterwards. So, Dr. Badalora, give us a walkthrough, if you could, on your thoughts on this concept called white privilege.
Sure. Well, to link it up with the story that was in the news recently in response to the Eagles winning the Super Bowl, the reason that white people were not portrayed as thugs in our white media, and the reason in which riot police were not targeting and responding to these groups as if they are a threat to society, is because in colonial North America, when white people were first invented as a group of humanity, there was an alliance created that linked law enforcement with the presumption and with the privileges associated with whiteness. For example, we know that one of the very first laws passed to assert whiteness on these European laborers was a law that made it illegal for Black people to testify against white people. And in that very first law, it's a great example of this connect made that linked law enforcement from its founding to white supremacy. And so because we have never unpacked this history, because we continue to fail to shed light on white supremacy in all its everyday forms, we continue to see white people being seen in these most positive of ways. And so that translates in how white people are treated by law enforcement, how we are described by the news media, etc.
Jane Elliott, for 52 years now, 52 years ago, you after the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King, you produced an exercise that literally has gone around the world and back and has changed the world and perceptions of this world. Speak to us about, in our first interview, which was a radio show interview, actually, about 3 or 4 years ago, you talked about colorism versus white privilege. Can you speak to this concept of white privilege?
Yeah, because this concept of white privilege has only been around for about 500 years. You need to realize that before 500 years ago, and before Linnaeus started categorizing people, humans, the way he categorized plants, we didn't have the problem of difference of color because it was just simply taken for granted. There were differences in human beings. In about 500 years ago, because they needed a new way to decide who they were going to kill or enslave, they decided instead of working on religion, because you couldn't always tell what religion a person was, they set on skin color. That short a time ago. This hasn't been, people will say, well, it's always been this way. No, it hasn't. There have always been people of many different colors, all of whom are descendants of those first black females who originated in sub-Saharan Africa about, they think now, 500,000 years ago. You see, the white people are only white because they moved, people of color moved, black people moved farther and farther from the equator. And as they moved farther from the equator, their skin got lighter and lighter because their bodies produced less and less melanin. It wasn't until the colonial period that we decided that white people should be declared superior in this country and in the UK. It was a lie then, and it's a lie now. We are all members of the same race. You and I, the three of us, are all cousins. Every person on the face of the earth is a 30th to 50th cousin of every other person on the face of the earth. So we should be talking about colorism instead of racism because there's only one race. And if, as in Peggy McIntosh's list of white privileges, I can stand up and give my opinion without being criticized because of my race, since there's only one race, that should be true for every human being. But as long as you think that the skin color makes you better or worse than somebody else, you are ignorant. And it is my job as an educator to lead people out of that ignorance. If I don't accomplish anything else in the rest of my life, I am going to accomplish teaching people that there's only one race, we're all members of it, and what hurts you hurts me because you're one of my cousins, and I will not tolerate having one of my cousins of another color abused because of some other person's, human beings, ignorance about color, about skin color, which is what it's all about. There's only one race. Now, not everybody agrees with that, and do I care? No.
I know you don't. No, absolutely not. Dr. Badalora, please respond.
Well, what is there to respond to? You are brilliant. You articulate it so concisely, so clearly, and it is the truth. The truth. Over 99% of the human genome has been identified. There's no gene for these things we call races. Race doesn't exist because
race is not biological.
That's it, and the whole concept of a race as applied to humans, it's inappropriate. We are humanity.
We aren't flowers. We aren't plants. We aren't, and people who think, well, you can't, we must be different races, we different species. Well, let me put it this way. You can't cross a cat and a dog and get a dad or a cog. They're two different species. They cannot reproduce with one another. You can mate a person of one color group with a person of another color group and get a beautiful child out of that mating. That means we are all members of the same species. Get over it. It's time for us to look around and realize, for instance, about 3 weeks ago, my ex-daughter-in-law got her DNA, and she did that thing to find out who she is. She thought that she was probably mostly of the Nordic strain. She found out that most of her genetic structure comes from Ireland, England, and 1.6% Nigeria. I laughed loudly. I thought, how wonderful. Didn't you know? Did you not know that in every one of our DNA is a memory of those first black women's DNA? Because that's the way it is. Many people, there are people in this country who will shoot themselves at the thought that they are actually part black. Well, that's the way it is. Get used to it. It's a wonderful thing to know that
probably, I don't want to be facetious, but we're probably hoping that they would eliminate this thing.
What?
So the people who might shoot themselves if they found out they were part black, that might be a good thing. I'm not saying that might be necessarily a bad thing.
No. You can't educate a dead person.
Right.
But can they, I mean, okay, let me push back on this.
That's why it doesn't work to try to educate Donald Trump.
Let me push back on this, Jane. And I appreciate this, and because, in some ways this is preaching to the choir, but there are some people, look at and I don't want to, I have to go there because it's my show. A lot of the people who voted for Trump, those are probably the people who, if they found out that their ancestry began in Africa, they would probably kill themselves as well. We want, you know, I don't know what that would do to the economics of the, and the population of America, but there's, what do you do for people who just absolutely unequivocally cannot be educated because they just, there's this genetic memory of and socialization of hate for pigmented people.
You show them love. You show them Jane Elliott. You show them people who look like them, but who see the world radically differently and who are capable of manifesting love for all of humanity. Look, when Jane and I walk into classrooms, we can open doors. We can't force people through them. We can open them. And even for all of those people that seemingly that seem to be uneducatable, I don't believe that, because even seeing a model of someone who perceives the world and behaves in the world in a way radically different from their own mindset, that is an education for those people. And it may not transform them in that instant, in that moment, but even in my own life, I remember some things from my first year of college that, and I can even give you a concrete example. So I remember this professor in college, it must have been a psychology class, but she was speaking about being present. I kid you not, Jane Elliott and Philippe Matthews, I had no freaking clue what being present meant. I really didn't. But I have reflected back on that later on in life as I was able to know what being present in the world is. So we are, even when I have my most frustrating days in a classroom or with an audience, I know that I have presented them, even though I didn't see them changing in this moment. I know they've seen something different. And it may not manifest today, but it may manifest tomorrow.
Mm. Jane Elliott.
Well, I do things that people can't walk away from. I tell them the next time you come up to a traffic signal, the stoplight, and it's red and you have to stop, and there's a big truck beside you, and the trucker's with the motor, so because he's in a hurry, he's on schedule, and you look up at him and smile, he thinks you're smiling at him because you think he's cute. He doesn't realize that you're saying to yourself, Sonny, right now, your life and what you do is being dictated by the invention of a black man. Now, when you tell that to people, to college students, they just howl because they know that when the bicycles, when the Harley Davidson boys come up and they're sitting there wanting to go, and that invention of the black man is telling them whether they can stop or not. And then I say to them, now, here, let's do this. Everybody take off your shoes. Now, put your right shoe on your left foot. Put your left shoe on your right foot. Now, try to take 3 steps. How do you like me now? The last for sewing shoes together mechanically so that you could have a right and a left shoe was invented by a black man. Every time you put your army boots on in the morning, or your motorcycle boots, or your high heels, those 5-inch heels that you have trouble staggering around on, you are enjoying what was produced for you by a black man, Jan Ernst Matzeliger. People go, oh, and I say, now, everybody take a deep breath, and everybody, because now they're afraid of me, so they take a deep breath and say, now, blow 600 people at a time doing this is probably not a smart idea because it spreads a lot of germs. I say, now blow it out. Now, take another deep breath. Now, folks, when you exhaled teeny tiny portions of your cells. Pieces of yourself went out into the air. And when you inhaled the portions of the people around you. So you can never be just you again because you have inhaled portions of all those people sitting around you. Now what are you going to do? And they just look like, and I said, now I'm going to buy stock in a surgical mask company because I think people are going to be buying a lot of them so that they won't be inhaling pieces of those who are around them. You can't avoid inhaling. If you want to stop breathing, then you don't have to worry about color. But if you're going to breathe, you're going to have to realize that you are part of every person you visit with. And he or she is part of you forever. That's the way it is. It sounds simplistic, but it's not really simplistic because that's the way we spread germs. If we spread germs that way, then don't we also spread those parts of ourselves that way? Yeah, we do. We don't want to admit that, but we do.
Well, you're talking subatomic, you know, and quantum physics is that, you know, you can't get out of life alive without being connected with everything in the universe in itself. So
Well,
that
you
is
can't if you
absolutely
try.
phenomenal.
You can if you try. Lots of people try to do that very thing. Lots of people stay in their own little community with people who look like them so that they don't have to learn about those who are different from themselves.
Mm.
And that's the reason I wear this shirt that says prejudice is an emotional commitment to ignorance. Because that's what it is. If you can stay ignorant about those other people, if you can practice the golden rule, which we don't. The golden rule says, do unto others as you would have others do unto you. That's the golden rule, as interpreted from Chinese philosophy by Christians. In Chinese philosophy, that rule said, do unto others as others would have you do unto them. A totally different concept. Treat others the way they want to be treated. I don't have the right to treat you the way I want to be treated. I have to treat you the way you want to be treated. And in order to find out how you want to be treated, I have to ask you, I have to listen to your answer, and then I have to do what you ask me to, as long as it isn't indecent, immoral, or illegal. I believe in the platinum rule, which says, do unto others as others would have you do unto them. Treat others the way they want to be treated. But that takes the power away from us. And we don't. We Christians do not practice the golden rule. We say it, but we don't practice it.
So with this ignorance that you talk about, Jane, Dr. Badalora, if you could, we've I guess kind of demystified white privilege and gone deeper into understanding that. You know, I've had you on with Dr. Robin DiAngelo, who took Peggy McIntosh's work to the next level with white fragility, which is where whites become increasingly uncomfortable when they are faced with the inevitable preponderance of overwhelming evidence as it relates to colorism and what have you, and the cognitive dissonance, as one of my viewers was asking about white fragility and cognitive dissonance. Speak to us about that as it relates to dealing with the ignorance in these isolated communities with these people who are making a choice, in a sense, to be ignorant.
Well, Robin DiAngelo's work of white fragility, of course, is connected to the fact that because our society has been set up from its founding as a matter of law to confer unearned advantages on white people, so our systems, our institutions, from law to education, you name it, those systems were built for white people, by white people, to advantage white people. And because that is our history, today when white people are asked to think about, to feel, to consider racial disparities in our current moment, what so often happens that Robin DiAngelo talks about is that we don't have tools for coping with that reality that race has given us unfair advantages. And so what we do then, because we don't have tools for that, is these variety of mechanisms come into play. We distract. The white woman starts crying, oh, please, I'm wounded, take care of me, so that we don't have to talk about people of color and their harm. Or the typically white male response, which is both mansplaining and anger. And so, it's all connected. That the constructs that create that white fragility and those responses, it's the same white supremacy that started this nation the way it did. I think I love that Robin DiAngelo's work helped us to see the ways in which institutionalized white supremacy continue to impact us psychologically and emotionally.
Jane Elliott, your thoughts?
I've been hearing white fragility a lot lately, along with white privilege. I find it highly amusing, actually, that we talk about white fragility for white people who are going to have to deal with the fact that they aren't in fact superior, and that in fact the little coping skills that they've had to develop are nothing compared to the coping skills that Black women have been developing in this country for 400 years, and Native American women. We don't talk about Native American or Black fragility or Asian fragility because we just expect them to cope. In fact, what we are saying is all these other color groups are stronger than white people. We don't have to worry about them being fragile. We know they can take this nonsense because they've been taking it ever since we started to tell them they should. So I really, and I think when I hear the white privileges conference, I went to a white privilege conference once, I'll never go again, but when I hear them talking about white privilege, I realize that what we're really talking about is white ignorance. And our supremacy is that we don't have to recognize the value of other people because we white folks are superior. But now we're looking at a situation which within 30 years, white people will be a numerical minority in the United States of America. God bless you, and she will.
Hope so.
In 30 years, white people will be a numerical minority in the United States of America. You want to talk about white male fragility? This is going to get really ugly if white people don't learn the same kind of coping skills that people of other color groups have developed over 500,000 years. Well, we need to realize that we are not fragile. We can develop these coping skills, and we will, or we will perish. We are going to have to look at people of color as our relatives, as our cousins, as deserving of the same kinds of privileges that you and I have. Because if I, because of my race, can be appreciated, then since we're all members of the same race, so should everybody be able to expect to be appreciated.
Yeah. I just wanted to say a couple things. I mean, I know that Robin DiAngelo's work, she calls white people to get on the bus and get those tools, and offers ways to advance the coping skills. So I think that's an important thing to say. But I also want to say one other thing, because I hear folks a lot talking about this numeric shift that's this demographic shift that's underway in this country where white people will be numerically a minority. But
2045, 2050. I had one of the top demographers on my radio show, Kenneth Gronbach, and all the numbers are supporting that rapid change in the demographics of America, turning brown and Black. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I think, but here's what I wanted here's what I wanted to caution about. I worry that we're relying on that numerical shift in ways that other historical moments have suggested we might want to be a little more careful. And let me be specific about that. In apartheid South Africa, we had a white numeric minority that controlled and managed the white supremacy structure over a vast majority of the African population. So white supremacy in a society, it's about power, not necessarily about the numbers of people, you know, reflecting this so-called racial order. So I just think we have to be careful assuming that shift is going to necessarily lead to the kind of social justice change that I think we all imagine.
That's a good point. One of the things that to come on the end of that, Gronbach was talking about this 85 million millennials that are entering the workforce, that are coming out of college and going into the world. One of the key characteristics, and this group is larger than the baby boomers, it's the largest group of America in history, 85 million. And it's going to be women-led because mostly there's more women than men. Most of the women are going to have careers. Most of the men are going to have jobs. But one of the things that he was saying that in terms of consciousness was related in race relations, he said that most of these millennials, and he was including he was talking about his daughters as well, they don't see, they are not necessarily prejudiced. Now, you know, we understand that they have been raised in a white institutionalized world, and they might not even be consciously aware of that, but they are not overtly, if you will, racist. And they also will be the generation that will have the highest level of cultural relationships or intermarrying. So that can also be looked upon as a threat to the most ignorant of quote unquote European Americans, because they don't have the education. And so as a result of, they wake up every morning and they start seeing more and more people of color, particularly after 8 years of the Obama administration and black people in the White House. That was a hard pill to swallow, even though the America said, hey, you know, this is the ideal. We want to move in this direction. But the demographics are not supporting, in a sense, that ideal. But this new generation coming up, which I think is the generation that's going to change literally the world, they're not having that. And that's why you see, if you will, these ignorant European Americans out marching, if you will, and protesting. You know, Jews will not replace us, and all of these crazy things. So when you start seeing white people marching, you know there's a shift coming. Go ahead, Jane.
Yeah. If people think, and I agree with everything you say, this is a ridiculous situation we have set ourselves up to lose. There's no way we can win if we continue to think that color is the main part of our personality, or what gives us power. But if we could, in the schools today, teach that there is only one race, if we could refuse to go along with what Ben Wattenberg said. Have you read Ben Wattenberg's book, The Birth of Earth?
It took forever for me to find this darn thing, but it's on the way. But yeah, everybody, you got to get The Birth of Earth. It's a hard book to find because they really don't want you to have that book.
Because nobody wants you to read it. And they don't want you to read Nathan Rutstein's The Racial Conditioning of Our Children either. But everybody needs to read that one. It's absolutely essential that people who are in education read those two books, because then you'll realize after you read Wattenberg that the reason for the wall on the southern border of the United States is to keep those brown-skinned people out. We don't want this country to have all those brown-skinned people, as if brown-skinned people like the Aztecs didn't do fabulous things before white people got here and started to kill them because we thought they were savages because they don't worship properly. If you read Ben Wattenberg, you'll realize that they are doing everything they can. The government is, and particularly now under this fool, is doing everything it can to keep white women from having abortions. When he wrote the book in 1987, he said that one of the three things we can do to change this situation, to keep America a white man's land, is remember that 60% of the aborted fetuses every year are white. If we could keep that 60% alive, that would solve our birth dearth. Well, I quoted those statistics at a college not too long ago, and one of these young men with a red hat on, the red cap on, that said, make America hate again, which is what it really means. He said, Mrs. Ellis, you've got your statistics wrong. I said, will you tell me your statistics? He said, now 39% of the fetuses that are aborted every year are white. 61% are fetuses of color. I said, you just made my point. He said, what do you mean? I said, that means that we are succeeding in seeing to it that white women have fewer abortions. He just was shocked. He said, I didn't think of it that way. I said, that's because you haven't been trained to think. You have only been trained to respond in ways that will get you a good grade in your classroom. Right. Start thinking. Right now, we own 39% of the aborted fetuses are white. If this person is president for 3 more years, which I don't think he will be, but if he is, within 3 more years, that statistic will be down to about 25%, because we are trying to do away with Planned Parenthood, as if that's all that Planned Parenthood clinics were for providing abortion. They do wonderful things and provide wonderful services for women who can't afford the services that would be offered in the regular doctor's office. They are absolutely essential. But you see, if we have this linear thinking person leading the country, and now this last week, I know you're going to think, well, stop talking about politics. We're talking about racism. Well, racism is politics in this country. Politics is racist in this country. You need to know that. Right now, they have decided that all the tips that people who work in restaurants get are going to go to the management instead of to the wait persons. This is ridiculous. They're working for $7 an hour, and depending on their tips, now those tips are going to go to the management. They're passing that law. I'm worried about that. I should think everyone would be worried about that kind of thing. Now, this week, we're planning on a huge military parade down the streets of Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C., which is mostly black. The inference with that kind of planning does not miss my attention. This is called power in action, people. We're talking about power, and we put our power in the hands of the wrong kind of people. Now, now you're thinking she doesn't like white people. Oh, yes, I do. I'm not prejudiced about white people. Some of my best friends are white. Make no mistake about that. However, they're different from the rest of them. We don't all have to act like fools, which is what we were sort of getting away from that. With Jimmy Carter helped, and even the Bushes helped a little bit. Georgie boy wasn't great, but his father knew a little bit about what he was talking about. And then we got this fool. Because white people are so angry at having a black man in the White House for 8 years. I remember when Richard Nixon said to a group of white reporters, "I'm trying to save the White House for you white people." At that point, I decided we've got to change the name of the White House to the President's Residence. Let's have it reflect what it is. Let's have a description that makes sense instead of calling it the White House. There are lots of White Houses in Washington, D.C. But that White House is, according to many people, for white people. That's called power in action, and we've been exposed to that long enough. If those have been black women protesting, Me Too, if the majority of them had been black, all those protests would have been viewed in a very different way.
Exactly right.
Absolutely. Well, we do have what's now the. I remember someone sending me the FBI information on this new Black Identity FBI probe, and it basically targets anyone of color who basically protests and march. If you are, you don't have to be a member now of any organization like Black Lives Matter. All you have to do is show some level of support toward that organization, and you can be put on an FBI list. You can be removed from your home and work and held without due process. And so here we are again, seeing this white power and privilege as it relates to the military and the military state.
Can I say something about Black Lives Matter?
Please do.
When white people hear the statement Black Lives Matter, they think it says only Black Lives Matter. When black people hear that statement, they're saying Black Lives Matter too. And if they would just add a comma and the word TOO to Black Lives Matter, then white people might be a little less upset about it. But white people are seeing only Black Lives Matter because white people aren't getting out there and protesting with those black people. If all those white women who protested the Me Too thing, we were doing the Me Too march last week and 2 weeks ago, had gone and marched with the Black Lives Matter people, they would have seen that Black Lives Matter too, that we are all members of the same race, and if it hurts black people, it hurts white people because we're all members of the same race. But as long as it's just just a black issue, we don't have to think about it. But if it's a black issue, it's a human issue, and it's my issue.
Right. I want to jump in too and just add to this militarized surveillance of black social action. You mentioned that when Black Lives Matter do something, FBI is going to be alerted and surveilling and the like. But here's something else that is in a line with that, but far more troubling to me, right? Because if you know much about U.S. history, you virtually expect our governmental agencies to be involved in all kinds of social control, especially where non-white people are concerned. But I know for a fact that a number of non-for-profits, right? These are non-for-profit organizations centered around social justice, mind you, and in their own hiring practices, they will use involvement in Black Lives Matter, for example, and other groups seeking to advance social justice and equity for people of color in this country. And that is viewed as a as a red flag marker, even for those organizations. So you're rendered suspect if you support an organization that advances the human dignity of people of color.
Here I am, guys. Here I am, FBI. Come on, this is a Philippe Matthews show. Come on with it.
Not the FBI.
I know damn well I'm on some. I gotta be on some list, and I'd be pissed if I wasn't. That's what I'm saying.
But it's social justice not-for-profits who are doing that.
Oh my gosh, unbelievable. Well, okay, so you know, let's go into this even deeper. Now, one of the things that you said, Jane, I want to clarify. You were talking about Planned Parenthood, and we know about Margaret Sangerman and her agenda, and Planned Parenthood in the Black community, and the extermination of Black people and Black babies. And you had mentioned that they're a great organization. I don't want to get anybody in trouble here, so I want you to kind of clarify that for us, because that sounds like when Donald Trump was saying there's good people on both sides. I know that's not what you meant. So can you clarify what you mean by Planned Parenthood? Because in our community, we don't look at them as, we don't look at that organization in a positive light at all.
Well, then your community has the right not to. But if your community is unaware that now Planned Parenthood is being used to increase instead of decrease the number of white babies being born in this country, you'd better take another look at Planned Parenthood.
You say Planned Parenthood is looking to increase whites versus decrease.
Being used in that way.
It's being used. It's being used in a bad way. But it is also being used in a good way for a whole lot of women. And Black women can, if they choose, take advantage of all those advantages that are offered by Planned Parenthood. Unfortunately, in Black communities, Planned Parenthood does not see many white people demonstrating against abortion. Because if Planned Parenthood offers abortion in Black communities, that's a good thing as far as white people are concerned. You don't see riots outside Planned Parenthood clinics, either Black or white, in Black communities. At least I haven't seen it. I have seen it in white communities, because that's an affront to those white people who think that Planned Parenthood is for the purpose of aborting white fetuses. That's not it. That's only a teeny tiny part of what they do. And the number of doctors who are willing to perform abortions in this country has decreased drastically since 1987. It's hard to find someone who will do that. So we will be there's a wonderful book you need to read. Another wonderful book you need to read.
I've got the list.
About a woman who performed abortions in, I believe, the Los Angeles area. You'd ought to take a look at it. It was written by Stephen Bloom. Look up Stephen Bloom, and I can't remember the name of the book. It's the woman's name. It's just a fantastic book about what a service an abortionist provides. And that sounds like a crime to say such a thing. But I know women who, if they had had the opportunity and could have afforded an abortion, would have been better off. They would have, and so would their family.
So let's talk about that, because one of the things that was tantamount in making chattel slavery and the formation of these anti-miscegenation laws and the formation of America stick was Christianity. And so you think about abortion, and they try to make it about religion, but is it about religion, or is it about maintaining the white population?
Well, I think it's about maintaining the white population. And I think thou shalt not kill. We don't pay any attention to that at all when we're going to have a military parade down the streets of Washington, D.C.
Good point. Okay.
That is about let's go kill. That's not, we don't maintain a military necessarily for defense. We maintain a military to be sure that we can destroy those who would challenge our power. And that's exactly what that parade will say down the streets of Washington, D.C. is, see what happens to you if you challenge our power. That he chose to hold that in Washington, D.C. If that happens, this whole country should be up in arms, because that sends the wrong message to the citizens of that city.
Do you think that's in response to North Korea and what you see sometimes in that regard, that they have these military parades, and so now America is going to do so to show our might and power.
Right. Do we really need to have these phallic contests?
I know, right?
Around the globe, mine's bigger than yours. No, yours is bigger than mine. I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, it's
that's
such
a male
thing.
You know it, and so do I. That's a male thing.
Absolutely.
And it's time to give it up. It's the whole thing is just absolutely ridiculous.
I was gonna make a really bad joke. I was gonna say, well, if that's really the case, then we should have a military parade in Africa. But anyway, let's move forward.
Right.
I'm sorry, family. I had to do it.
Oh, you got to cut this out of the show. You are going to be in big trouble now.
I am going to be in big trouble. Absolutely, absolutely.
You know how this
Before we move on,
I'm sure I'm streamed right now. I'm being streamed live in the White House right now. I'm sure I am.
The conversation between Dr. Jacqueline Batalha and Jane Elliot is not a mere exchange of ideas. It's an archaeological dig into the very foundations of racial inequality. They excavate layers of history, law, and social practice, exposing the intricate, often invisible, architecture of white privilege. This isn't a surface-level exploration. It's a descent into the labyrinthine structures that continue to shape our world, a journey that demands intellectual rigor and emotional honesty. Dr. Badalora's meticulous deconstruction of whiteness is a masterclass in historical analysis. She dismantles the fallacy of race as a biological reality, revealing it as a social and legal construct. Race is not a fact of nature. It's a fact of society, she emphasizes. The early American colonies, far from being bastions of egalitarianism, were laboratories of racial stratification. The deliberate creation of whiteness was a strategic maneuver to solidify power. Control the narrative, control the people. The architects of this system understood. Laws were meticulously crafted to differentiate between those deemed white and those who were not, granting specific privileges to the former while systematically denying them to the latter. This wasn't a haphazard process. It was a calculated effort to create a racial hierarchy that would ensure the continued dominance of the ruling class. Badalora illuminates the insidious nature of this legal framework. The law is not neutral. It reflects and reinforces existing power structures, she argues. The legal privileges of whiteness, enshrined in policies and practices, became a self-perpetuating cycle of advantage. Access to land, voting rights, and legal protection were all contingent on racial classification, creating a system where whiteness became synonymous with privilege. Jane Elliot, with her trademark confrontational style, exposes the pervasive nature of white privilege. Privilege is invisible to those who have it, she asserts. It's the water we swim in, the air we breathe, the default setting of our society. It's the unearned advantages that come with being white, the subtle and not so subtle ways in which society caters to the needs and expectations of white people. Systemic racism, Elliot argues, is the silent architect of this privilege. It's not about individual bad apples. It's about a rotten barrel, she declares. It's about the embedded biases within our institutions, the policies and practices that perpetuate inequality, even in the absence of overt prejudice. It's the subtle ways in which whiteness is normalized and centered while other races are marginalized and exclude. Elliot's exercises, designed to simulate the experience of discrimination, are not mere theatrics. They are powerful tools for empathy and understanding. Walk in my shoes, she challenges, forcing participants to confront the reality of living in a society where race determines opportunity and experience. The discomfort and frustration that participants experience are a mere glimpse of the daily reality for people of color. The role of religion in justifying slavery and racism is a particularly painful and complex issue. Elliot's critique is not an attack on faith itself, but a condemnation of its misuse. They twisted the word of God to justify evil, she argues. Biblical verses were selectively quoted and misinterpreted to create a theological justification for slavery, turning Christianity into a tool of oppression and division, highlighting the need for a critical examination of its historical and ongoing impact. Elliot's critique of the White House is a masterclass in semiotic analysis. Symbols matter, she argues. The name of the president's residence is not a neutral descriptor. It's a powerful symbol of white dominance. The irony that enslaved black laborers built the White House, yet were excluded from its leadership for centuries, underscores the deep-seated contradictions at the heart of American democracy. The White House becomes a metonym for the entire system of white privilege, a symbol of the power and privilege that accrue to whiteness. It's a constant reminder of who holds power, Elliot argues. The name reinforces the notion that whiteness is the default setting of American society, the standard against which all other races are measured. Batalora and Elliot both emphasize the crucial role of education in dismantling white supremacy. Knowledge is the antidote to ignorance, they argue. The failure of the education system to teach the true history of race and privilege is a major obstacle to progress. sanitized versions of history that minimize the brutality of slavery and the ongoing impact of systemic racism, perpetuate ignorance and maintain the status quo. A curriculum that confronts the uncomfortable truths of American history is essential. Teach the truth, however painful. They urged young people need to learn about the legal and social construction of whiteness, the history of slavery and Jim Crow, and the ongoing impact of systemic racism. They need to understand how these systems continue to shape our society. Even in the absence of overt prejudice, critical thinking and unlearning biases are essential tools in this process. Challenge your assumptions, Elliot implores. We must be willing to examine our own beliefs and behaviors, to acknowledge our implicit biases, and to actively work towards dismantling them. This requires ongoing self-reflection and a commitment to lifelong learning. This conversation is not merely an intellectual exercise, it's a moral imperative. We cannot be bystanders, Battalora and Elliot argue we must move beyond awareness to action, using our voices and our platforms to challenge racism in all its forms. This means supporting policies that promote racial equity, challenging racist jokes and comments, and amplifying the voices of marginalized communities. It means confronting our own biases and privileges, and actively working towards creating a more just and equitable society. Justice is not a spectator sport, they remind us. The conversation between Battalora and Elliot is a call to awaken from the slumber of complacency. The time for change is now, they declare. The structures of white privilege are real, and they continue to perpetuate inequality, but they are not insurmountable. By understanding the history of their creation, by acknowledging their ongoing impact, and by committing to active change, we can build a future where race no longer determines destiny. The path is not easy, but the journey is necessary. It requires courage, empathy, and a commitment to justice. Alright, you've journeyed through the intricate layers of white privilege, dissected the historical constructs, and confronted the uncomfortable truths. But hold on, the exploration doesn't end here. The story continues, and you won't want to miss the second part of this powerful conversation. In that next installment, Battalora and Elliot delve even deeper, tackling the contemporary manifestations of these deep-rooted issues. We're just scratching the surface. They reveal, as they unpack the subtle ways systemic racism operates in our modern world. They confront the complexities of allyship, the challenges of dismantling internalized biases, and the crucial steps needed to forge a truly equitable future. Trust me, you'll want to see this, because Part 2 builds on the foundation laid here, providing even more insight and actionable takeaways. It's a continuation that promises to challenge your perspectives and ignite a renewed commitment to change. Don't get left behind. There are even more key points to be learned. If you found this discussion eye-opening, if it sparked a desire to learn more and do better, then hit that subscribe button. Stay connected for more vital conversations like this. Don't miss a beat as we continue to unravel the complexities of race and inequality. And remember, sharing is caring. Spread this knowledge, ignite conversations, and challenge others to confront these crucial issues. Let's get the word out, because understanding is the first step towards change. Finally, your voice matters. Leave a comment below, share your thoughts, your reflections, your questions. Let's keep the dialogue going, because it's through open and honest conversations that we can create a more just and equitable world. Join the conversation and be a part of the change.